Hi friend, David here from Learn Stage Lighting, and today I want to talk about my top tips for lighting in small venues. And my very first tip is think about your environment. Okay, let's dive into that today. So when we talk about the environment, this really comes off of where we were in the last video, which if you haven't checked that out, check that out here. Because when you're in a small venue, one of the biggest advantages you have is that your stage is probably small and your venue as a whole is small. How's that an advantage? Well, let's do story time with David. So I got a couple pictures here of small venues that I lit for various things. So when you walk into your average small venue, maybe it's a band in a corner, that's what this first picture is, you see something like this. You see some T-bar stands, or in this case some pieces of truss, because I did this for a production company, that's what they owned. At the front corners of the stage, shooting some multicolored LED bars at the band, and then there may be some other stuff around, okay? In this case, just to look at it, we've got, even at the time when I did this show, some pretty old, outdated LED instruments, some lights behind the band, lighting this wall behind them. And in fact, if you look at the wall behind me and the wall behind that band, the size of their stage is only like a third bigger than this area that I'm in, okay? And that's a huge advantage to you when you think about choosing the right lights and when you think about making a really great environment with the lights you have. Because look at this. Right behind me, I've got 2 lights. In that picture, I've got 6 lights behind the band, okay? If you're in a mid-sized venue and you've got like a 20-foot wide stage or a 30-foot wide stage, 6 lights ain't gonna do squat, right? It doesn't go far. But in a small venue, it really can do a lot, okay? So when I think about small venues, one of the biggest, coolest things is that you can take just a couple of lights, okay, and cover your stage. Now, the first thing that I want to do in any small venue, in any venue of any size, is get my stage wash, my front light, right first. Now, I go over that in this video, which is called how to create the awesome even stage wash. But when it comes to a small venue, there are some tweaks that we need to make to this, okay? The biggest tweak is that typically the ceilings are often quite low. And so getting that perfect 45-degree up and out angle is going to be really difficult, okay? Now, I've got some tips for this. For one, if you don't need a massive amount of control for your lights, or even if you do need some, look at video type lighting sources, camera lights, okay? Because stage lights, like say you take your average LED bar stage light, this is one from Gamma, it's one of their, whatchamacallit bars, one of their LED bars that they sell. And like an average LED bar, it's designed for a mid-sized stage or a larger stage, and therefore, it has a pretty narrow angle of the light that comes out of it, right? Now, when you're in a mid-size or large venue, if this thing's 10 feet away from the stage, from somebody's head on stage, or, more, it's going to look really good, right? There's going to be enough width of the light, but it's narrow enough that you can see the beam. If you have atmosphere, things look great. You could even use a par like this, though I generally prefer white ones still, even though some of them are getting better where we can get color and white from the same unit and get a good stage wash. But, some of these are getting good enough that we could use them for front light. But in a small venue, you might have a stage like I'm standing here. And the light might literally be, right in 2 feet, 4 feet in front of the performer, and just a couple feet up, right? And that could be your 45-degree angle. But when the light's only 4 feet away from the performer, it's going to be real wide to cover, like, any area. Or else all you get is a spot like this that the performer gets in and out of, the pictures look terrible, everything looks bad. Okay? So one of my tips is to go look at video lighting, and I'll pop some up on the screen from Amazon, which we'll link to below. Those will be affiliate links, so I'll get a very small commission if you buy anything through there. But video lights often aren't DMX controlled, but some are DMX controllable. The biggest thing with an on-camera light like this, like the one I have in front of me, is that they generally have a really wide angle of coverage. So that means you're going to be able to cover that front wash. Often they're a softer light as well. They're not going to cast real harsh shadows. You can see my shadow there. It's not real harsh. It's not hard. And it's generally really pleasing to the eye. Okay, if you can't do those type of lights, I would say find the widest LED type unit you can find, right? Or non-LED. Sometimes just some old school par 38s on a dimmer pack can work great. Okay, so get that right first, but then I want you in your small venue, and this is going to be a lot of what we talk about through this month, to think about the environment. Think about the area of that small venue that's not the stage. Because if you watch large shows, which is where we get a lot of our inspiration from, many of us, right, including myself, you'll see over the past years, it used to just be that just the stage was lit and there were only lights at the stage. Nowadays, you'll see at big concerts, and this is to some people's chagrin, that there's constantly lights blinding people in the audience. I don't always love that. But the shows that are really masterful and the shows that are really well done, they bring lights into the audience and they go ahead and fill the audience with light without blinding them. And what this does is it brings all of the audience together. It makes them all part of the show, part of the mood, and shapes the entire space to feel like they're a part of the show that's happening. And that's cool. And that's what creates impactful shows. And so how do you get there in a small venue? Well, it's actually really stinking easy. Look back to this show that I did when I was much younger, and it was actually the first time I used moving lights. And what we did, we had 2 moving lights. 2, okay? They were not big moving lights. At the time, they were 300-watt units, which in today's LEDs is probably, a little bit less. Maybe like this 250-watt mover making this soft gobo behind me. It's the Gamma TX4 that they had sent me previously, and I reviewed here. But anyways, I'm going to keep mentioning videos, and at some point I'm going to run out of YouTube cards, and you won't see the videos I'm recommending. But, a small 250-watt mover like that with a prism aimed up at the ceiling, 2 of these covered this space that had, I think, 600 students. Your venue might be a lot smaller. But if you look for a small light that's got a prism and maybe some zoom, you can cover a really big area with just a simple light. And that can really shape the room, really shape the mood. What are some other things we can use to shape the mood? Well, it doesn't have to be stage type lights. Okay, one of the things we talk a lot about and I'm going to have a whole video dedicated to it later, is LED type projects and pixels. Because with LED pixels, we can hand make and build different pieces that we can put behind a small venue stage, and it can be done pretty inexpensively. Okay? And when you do that, then you're able to really create a lot of mood, create a lot of interest in really cool looking stuff without spending a lot of money. This stuff really doesn't have to be expensive if you know where to get it, okay? Especially on the kind of hobbyist level, right? So those are some really great options. And so the biggest thing that I want to drive home here when we think about the environment of the room is shaping the environment and bringing in the venue that you're a part of, whether it be a concert venue, a bar, a church, a small theater, doesn't have to use a lot of lights. Take, for example, this photo. Okay, this was a theatrical show that was actually done in a large corporate boardroom type space. Okay, and the lighting designer on it, I was the technician programmer, but the designer on it was with Cirque du Soleil actually, and you might think that means there's a huge budget, but for this there wasn't at the time. And so with a relatively small amount of lights for the stage, I think there's like 6 or 8 movers in there and a handful of LED pars. With just those few lights, he's able to shape the room with light. If you're in a small venue, in a church or a bar or a club or whatever, think about how you could cover your space throughout the venue, cover over your audience area with just a couple lights. Maybe it's a par like this one that I showed, just, up as high as you can get it, or maybe from the ceiling right across it, grazing across that ceiling, right? Covering that ceiling area. That can cover a venue really well and give you a really great look. All you've got to look out for when you're doing that, and I've done this tons of times, is when you're pointing that light, get it aimed slightly up, and when you see the dot of light on the wall, okay, you see the dot of light where it's ending up on the back wall or the side wall or wherever you're pointing it, as long as that's above where people's heads are, it's not going to be super bright in their eyes, okay? Usually aim for the back of the ceiling or the top of the wall, depending on how tall the space is, okay? So this doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be fancy. Really, the biggest key is that you've just got to think through it more than, the average person. And when you do that and use the basic tools that we have of like LED pars, simple moving lights, and custom LED type pixels, which we'll talk about later this month, you really can create a really transformative environment that is super interesting, engages people, and makes them feel like your venue, whatever type of a venue it is, makes them feel like, okay, what they were in and what they were a part of was not just a simple show with a band over there or a church service from the stage, but it was an entire environment, an entire experience where you were a part of everything. This is where, the real high-end professionals like theme parks and, things like that really can shine sometimes, where they create this entire experience which is beyond just, oh, there's a band in the corner playing on stage. So if you like this, loved these tips, be sure to subscribe and grab my guide to beginning with lighting. It's customized to what you're doing with lighting, and you can grab it at learnstagelighting.com. Click here on the link on the screen. Awesome. Next week, in our next video on this playlist, we're going to talk about, okay, console time. So when it comes to control, and you've got to control these lights, how are you going to do it?